You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com. Hi all, and welcome back for a tragic walk down memory lane. Get ready for a good cry, prepare your tissues, and we will open up the wounds, explore the traumas, and figure out just why film forums disappeared into oblivion. Well, all except icmforum.com and a few other last survivors, of course. Every single IMDb forum is gone, so is the Mubi forum. Others, once prosperous in content, are now ghost towns. In this episode, we will talk about how we fell in love with film forums, our most bizarre and embarrassing experiences, and talk openly about our own traumas, our own loss. Saul is here as always, as is Adam, and for the very first time, we are joined by icmforum.com co-founder Lauren, or Mighty Sparks, as you might know her on the forum. Say hi everyone, and just briefly tell us about your very first memory of entering or participating in a film forum. And as this is your first time, Lauren, you can go first.
Okay, well, I'm Lauren or Mighty Sparks, and I was on IMDb, but I never really posted on any forums until we made the I Check Movies forum, or the ICM forum, which I was co-founder of.
It's pretty interesting that you went from essentially never writing or participating in forums to just creating your own forum from scratch.
Yeah, we did start with the Facebook group, but yeah, before that, I never talked online at all. I just read stuff.
And I think that's a pretty common experience as well. There are so many lurkers out there. So to bring it over to your co-founder, actually, Adam.
Yeah, I posted on a football forum for a few years, but I didn't post on any film forums until I created the forum with Lauren.
That's pretty incredible. So the two founders of one of the biggest and most popular film forums out there just didn't post on other film forums first. That is pretty incredible. However, I know that both Saul and I have a long experience with posting on film forums. So let's just jump straight to Saul.
I pretty much grew up on the IMDb message boards. When I first registered there, I was 14, and when they shut down, I was 30. So I was actually literally on the IMDb message boards half of my life. And it gave me an interesting and slightly warped perspective of what a film forum could be, because looking at how the IMDb message boards worked and how they were managed compared to ICM Forum, and the board shut down and I moved to ICM Forum, I actually saw how dynamic, properly managed film forum could be.
Yeah, that's pretty much my experience as well. I think I also joined the IMDb forums first, probably also when I was like 15 or 16 or so. And I was also there all the way until the end, though. By that point, I had started to wander away and explore other film forums as well, because, as you said, Saul, IMDb forums weren't exactly properly managed.
The thing about the IMDb message boards is it got worse as time went along. I still remember when I was using it when I was in high school, and this is going to be back in 2002, 2003, 2004. There were actually proper moderators there who were doing things. If you made a complaint, something would get managed. Everything just became automated towards the end. So the trolls pretty much took over and everybody would attack you any which way, no matter what you said, because there was nobody controlling it by the end. What started out as was really good. And I think as a film buff, just getting into film, it was actually a really interesting thing to have. I was 14 or 15 years old, but by the time I'd got to 30 and it got shut down, I'd probably pretty much outgrown my use for the IMDb message boards, although it was, of course, sad to see them go.
Yeah, the trolls are a really big part of why I disappeared eventually too. And I think it's a little bit sad because in the early years when I was there, it really felt like a close-knit community with a decent amount of people who knew each other's styles and would recommend films. But there was also just so much complete and utter trash going on that often ruined the experience, including people who are just obsessed with spoiling every single film under the sun. So I have to ask though, Lauren, what's the main reason why you never felt like joining the IMDb forums in terms of actually posting on there? Was it the trolls or was it something else?
I just didn't feel very comfortable speaking with people online. And I went on the individual boards on the film pages and the actor pages and stuff, and occasionally posted questions and joined in with some discussions. But the other boards just seemed too big. And so I just never really got involved.
So what's the first film you remember posting on and what was it about?
I think it was on the film Fangs, just to say that it really sucked.
That's actually pretty much the exact same thing as me. It wasn't Fangs, but it was Amadeus, which I think that's actually the reason why I joined IMDb in the first place. I actually signed up because I think I was 15 or so and we had seen Amadeus in class and I hated it. I saw that on IMDb that it had such a high rating and I wanted to just post about why it was so bad. And just slight disclaimer, I do actually love Amadeus now.
I definitely don't like Fangs now.
Quite contrary to Lauren and Chris, first movie that I posted on was the 1970 version of Wuthering Heights. And the reason being is that I watched it for some reason for school, because we were doing it, I think, in year 11 English literature. And the movie sort of ended with half of the plot still to go. So my question was, this is an adaptation, but only of half the book. Nobody responded to me straight away. I think I eventually got a response a year and a half later. In the meantime, I'd found out anyway that almost all adaptations of the book stop halfway through. The first reason I posted an individual board was because I was confused about a film rather than because I hated it. The first film that I posted on probably negatively would be Novocaine with Steve Martin. I'm just very phobic with teeth being pulled, as I mentioned in the previous podcast about disturbing films. So I made a comment in there sort of warning people that's disgusting, and if you don't like teeth being pulled, don't watch the film.
So sweet, you're being so incredibly helpful, Saul, to granted the very small minority who gets incredibly disturbed by seeing teeth pulled.
I don't actually remember the first film I posted on. I think when I joined, I used to post about TV programs. But even then, I hardly ever actually posted. I normally just went on and read the different posts about the film I'd just seen.
I think one of the really cool things about IMDb was that all of these TV shows and even several movies actually had their own communities. Like I remember posting on some TV shows I was a massive fan of as a teenager, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for instance, and you would have like 15, 20 regulars posting there every single day. It was really incredible just how many different usages the IMDb forums had.
It's actually a very good point, Chris, with television shows and message boards, because originally IMDb didn't have individual pages for television episodes. Like back in high school, I was watching a lot of MASH, the Alan Alda war comedy, and you couldn't ask about a single episode. You would have to do it on the message board for the TV series. TV series did have quite a few regular participants in there, but you couldn't actually do it per episode, although they did introduce episode pages later on in IMDb's existence before they decided to implode all of the message boards.
Did any of you participate in any other forums before you joined icmforum.com?
I did it for one day, register at IMDb2, which was a cloned version of the IMDb website. However, the activity there was very scarce and there was no interaction, and I registered with icm.forum on the same day. Currently, I'm at over 8,000 posts and I've stuck with it till this day, and I'm sure one day I'll have more posts on there than Adam and Lauren, maybe even than Adam and Lauren combined.
That's such fantastic, lofty goals. I think the only thing that's really missing from this episode is just some people who spend time on the other, really major forums we later got refugees from, like Mubi, the RottenTomatoes forums, etc. Because at one time, there were so many fantastic and great forums with their own subcultures and their own large sets of regulars. And for anyone who haven't been on the IMDb forums, perhaps they started getting into forums and discussing films after they disappeared a couple of years ago, they just can't comprehend its scope and how massive these forums are. Like we're talking about, say, just Film General alone, which was probably the biggest forum on IMDb, had several posts a minute, but maybe even a second. You could find a massive amount of topics updated within the last 5 to 10 minutes at certain hours of the day. It was incredible how active it was. This is all gone now, and I'm not sure where all of these people went.
Film General was very active, but Oscar Buzz was definitely the most active forum in my time on IMDb. I would go there every so often in November or December to try and work out which of the films are going to be nominated at the Globes and the Oscars, but I couldn't ever post there because the whole page would be people have posted within the last minute. So it'd be like 3 seconds ago, 5 seconds ago, and so on. Towards the end of my IMDb journey, I was mainly just on the classic film message board because in general and Oscar Buzz and the other big ones were just too active. There was too much going on. You couldn't follow topics there. You couldn't refresh it and see what people had done. With ICM Forum, I wake up each morning, I go and eat my breakfast, and I sit down and I refresh the forum, and I can see the active topics all on one page. And that's much more in tune with my sensibilities, at least at the moment.
We usually have 2-3 pages, but yeah, it's so true. And especially because obviously we have subforums as well, so you can easily divide it up and focus on what you're interested in. Plus that really nifty alert button at the top. So all the topics you posted before, if somebody replies, you get an instant notification. And these were some things that just weren't there on the IMDb forums, if I recall correctly. Although I think you could do something with the settings. Obviously, the Oscar Buzz forum was quite dead for long periods of the year, but you're absolutely right, Saul, that came to life. Like the reason why I call Film General the biggest there is because it had a consistent traffic.
No, I have to disagree with that, Chris. Oscar Buzz was quite big throughout the year. It did get bigger in the November to January period of the year, but it was big throughout because all these people going, these are my best actress nominees for 1981. This is my best sound ones for this year. Well, this is my top 20 of this year. So plenty of topics like that in there. Plenty of topics about who should have won Oscars, who shouldn't have. And even the speculation early in the year was there about all the films that they thought by the end of the year would win Best Picture. So I don't know. We don't have the proof of it there because Cole or whoever was running IMDb has taken down all of the message boards. If there was evidence there, I would suggest that Oscar Buzz would have been more active than Film General, although Film General probably had more discussion in there, whereas Oscar Buzz was mostly posting lists of things and commenting on them.
If any of our listeners love statistics and finding things through the Wayback Machine or have any statistics whatsoever, want to do an investigative report about Film General versus Oscar Buzz, go for it. A full-on battle to the death. And obviously there was also another forum we got quite a lot of great users from, which was the Classic Forum. And that was also a really active one with a lot of discussion. Funny thing here is that the atmosphere was completely different from Film General, despite both forums being really focused on many of the same things.
Classic Film was very different to Film General and even Best and Worst, which was one of the other big boards back in the day. There was a lot of discussion going on in Classic Film, and it's one I participated in the most because it was more at my speed. There weren't replies every second there, but there were a lot of very stuck up and sometimes quite obnoxious participants there. Some very strong personalities. They got to the point where if I saw certain films, I wouldn't report on the weekly thread because I knew that I would get taken down if I just said the single thing which I disliked about it. And I actually stopped watching a lot of acclaimed classics towards my last few years on IMDb because I knew I couldn't post about them without being saying, oh, well, why didn't you give it a 10 out of 10? I can't believe you're saying about it. It's such a classic. That was really annoying, and it's only really been since I've come on ICM Forum that I've started investigating some of those classics and actually getting into them because I know that I'm not going to get knocked for saying my opinion. Or if I do, one of the moderators like Chris will be able to jump in and maybe be able to censor somebody if they're saying something obnoxious.
Ironically, we have almost no moderation on the forum.
Some disagreement here, but yeah, I think that it's mostly me and Peaceful who do day-to-day on-page moderation. But I think the only time we actually censor comments is if it's personal abuse, and what I usually, at least, it's just spam. We do get like one spam post or two spam posts a week or so. That's about it, which is really lucky. Like if you look at the IMDb forums, there was spam and trash every single day. And I think it's also a little bit about the type of forum members we have, because there was some really terrible ones on IMDb. Really terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just joking. If people report a post, we do moderate it. And I think our approach is in general to try and let people post what they want. And like Chris said, we don't get a lot of problems from anyone on the forum, apart from the occasional spammer.
I was going to mention something, you're going to have to edit it out. I was going to say the only thing which you need to censor is when people talk about trying to murder dictators of other countries.
No, we'll leave that in as well. It's going to be a pretty free-flowing conversation with all of the little secrets covered up, yeah.
Okay, well, I won't mention his name then.
I think Chris has taken a bit too much credit. I think I also moderate. It's not just Chris and Peaceful. In fact, Chris, I don't know if you've ever moderated anything, to be honest.
Oh, don't you dare. I think if you look at the mod logs, you'll see my name there quite frequently.
Yeah, I think that can be my Saturday evening, checking the stats on moderation.
You should start giving out golden stars or something, a little bit award like moderator of the month. We had to get back to one thing we mentioned earlier, which is probably one of the best things about the forum, is that we almost have none of these people who doesn't understand that taste is subjective. Like that was one of the most ridiculous things about IMDb, and also one of the most ridiculous things about almost any forum I've ever been on before. It's just if you said something they disagree with, it would get personal. Like people would just attack you and call you names for not liking a film, or even for liking a film. It was utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, I never got that on the forums, but I'd often get comments on my list saying like, you don't like Charlie Chaplin, I hope you get cancer, and you're basically dog poo. And that sort of put me off going to the forums or getting more involved in discussions.
One of the worst things about IMDb message boards towards the end is that with all the automation which IMDb was doing, the trolls worked out that if they reported a topic, and I can't remember, it was either 2 or 3. If 2 or 3 separate accounts reported a topic, it just automatically got deleted. Some of the trolls would create 2 or 3 accounts, report a topic, and not just the main post, but all of the replies in there would get deleted. So with things like the horror challenge that we did on the horror message board each year, the person at the end of it had to create the original post, reply to it, then delete the original post, in order that if his original post got deleted, everybody else's wouldn't get deleted also. It really got a bit crazy towards the end, and it was only because IMDb didn't want to make anybody an unpaid moderator. Well, tons of people were prepared to volunteer to do it, and the forum could have survived with that, but they didn't want to have volunteers doing it, so they just blew it up instead. But, it's for the best, because ICM Forum's better, and I don't think I would have found it otherwise.
That reminds me, I really hated the quoting on IMDb as well, and trying to follow to different topics. That was one of the big things that put me off, apart from the incredible amount of posts.
Do you have it in nested mode? Because they had nested mode, flat mode, which was impossible to follow, and there was thread and there was inline, but nested was usually the best. When I first went to ICM Forum and it was on Zeta boards, I had a lot of trouble following that, because the whole quoted thing on Zeta boards was absolutely insane the way it did it, and actually almost registered with ICM Forum probably a couple of years before IMDb shut down, because they were doing the doubling the canon exercise also on ICM Forum. But I just couldn't get my head around the whole Zeta design, but of course I eventually did, and now we've got something even better, which has been designed by Peaceful using some of the free software out there.
I have completely forgotten about all of the fantastic meta discussions on the forums about just how you saw the post, like nested versus inline versus flat, and it's just incredible to hear this again. I used nested too. It was really great, and that's probably one of the main reasons why I didn't even go on that many other forums originally, because it was such a much easier way to see conversation. But that was also because there were so many bloody posts, and so much of it just wasn't interesting. Like the way the topic would work was that we would have a general topic, then there would be 1 or 2 posts, and then you would have complete conversations under this with like hundreds of posts until it broke it was bizarre and insane, and essentially each thread could work as its own massive subforum. You would often just see these Like, I think that every time you replied and went one in, you would get one and then if you replied to one under there, you would get another and that would be a way through to just realize just which part of the conversation you were in.
I did actually have that problem initially, Chris, but they got rid of it and it would only do the one so I got a bit smarter towards the end. They actually redesigned some of IMDb message boards towards the end and actually gave us avatars and everything. And it was sort of a bit disappointed that they shut it down because all the new changes only came in 12, maybe at the most 18 months before it got shut down. Yeah, the thing did get fixed up, which was sort of interesting because me and my friend all on it would sort of just do anyway and sort of add them in ourselves. But the system managed to automate it by the end.
And no one has really mentioned the elephant in the room either, that the death of the IMDb board should kind of be blamed on Amazon. Because, as you know, Amazon bought up IMDb, and I suppose they just thought that the message boards just weren't worthwhile revenue-wise.
Probably agree with that. I know when the boards were getting shut down, a lot of people were posting in the help section and saying things, well, I bought this many films through Amazon specifically because I found out about them on the message boards, but they still didn't care about it. The number of users using the message board compared to the number of site visits were minute. I think it was less than 0.1%. It depends how you measure that. Could somebody refreshing a page or looking at it when they're not logged in, if that counts as a unique visit, then of course there's going to be more unique visits by people who aren't going to the message boards. Anyway, the stats from them at the time said, yeah, it wasn't really worth investing in, and it was probably ruining the reputation of the website because they probably had more trolls than anywhere else on the internet.
Yeah, pretty much. It was just a massive side expense for them, really, that didn't really make sense from profit motive. But it's still so strange that the most active film forums on the web just all got shut down because of that. It just boggles my mind a little bit, even though it also makes complete sense.
Makes you sort of wonder what might happen with Adam and Lauren in a few years' time if they end up selling out to a big company and selling off the message boards, sort of like the way Cole's done with IMDb. Like, I'm sure it's not going to happen, but the thought has crossed my mind.
Are you going to sell out to big corporation guys?
Well, we've already turned down, I think, about 20 offers, Lauren. We care more about the forum than about the money. I think Lauren wanted to accept a couple of the offers, but I managed to persuade her that the community was more important. I also think that Chris and Sol have higher expectations of how much the forum is worth and how big the forum is than Lauren and I do.
Well, I always think about ICM Forum as being the largest movie forum still out on the internet. I'd assume that's actually worth something. It brings more film fans together than any other movie forum that I know about. But yeah, I don't know if Adam's really getting as many offers to sell it as he's claiming.
We did get an offer to merge the forum, actually, so there has been one real offer, but that was not for money.
Ooh, that's intriguing, and you've managed to maintain your independence. Now we are stronger than ever.
Yes, together we stand united.
It's good to know if we're all standing united and we'll defend ICM Forum to the death. I'm actually sure if ICM Forum is the very biggest film forum of all. There are a couple of those IMDb survivors that still have comparable traffic, I think. But the type of comments I see there is a lot more similar to what Film General used to do. And this is the one thing we haven't mentioned, but just the repetition and the kind of pointless types of posts that doesn't really add too much. You know, you'll see like the weekly call for top 100 list where you just see the most obvious questions, whereas on the ICM forum you have dedicated tweets where you can ask specific things and get answers almost immediately, and or we'll actually have longer good discussions about any topic under the sun, whereas these forums are more about just one-liners and having a bit of random fun, which we do too. We have threads for that, but that's not what the entire forum is about. But I think it's one thing that's interesting, and I just turn this over to the actual sadness and traumas we were talking about earlier, which is just over the last, I would say 5 or even 10 years, we've seen a complete and utter decline of films forums out there. Like, it's not just IMDb, like you mentioned in the intro, we were also talking about Mubi. We're also talking about so many others, including some of the great offshoots of Film General, like FG2 and FG3, which were also some of the best and most active forums out there for years. And today, there just aren't that many forums anymore, especially if you look at real in-depth conversations and communities. Like, you just almost don't have it. So do anyone want to guess why that happened?
I think there's been a rise in social media sites like Reddit. Everyone wants instant replies, often very short posts, and I think traditional forums aren't very suited to that. You have to dedicate more time to get anything out of them.
Also, like IMDb took away the commenting on lists and things to make a Facebook comment thing. Basically, they switched everything over to wanting people to comment on Facebook.
So once again, you're actually implying that we can blame Amazon for pushing film fans over to Facebook.
I think even without Amazon, there probably is a general trend towards kind of instant replies and everything. So I don't think it's just an Amazon problem. I think various forums are closing, and maybe what younger people want to do online in terms of posting is different from what it would have been in my generation. When I grew up, when you went online, it was all traditional forums. Facebook didn't even get big until I was at university or at the end of school. So I think there's a bit of nostalgia for traditional forums for my generation, at least for people who actively posted on them. I'm not sure if younger people, teenagers now, most of them are that interested in traditional forums, or maybe they just haven't had much experience with them.
Even if you look at the kind of comments and posts on the IMDb Facebook page and stuff like that, it's basically just hashtags, one-word comments, just likes, images. It's just quick, instant. They don't want the long discussions and things like that.
I find that's even true if you go to Letterboxd, which you can find some really great and insightful reviews on. But on average, I would say around 2/3 of the reviews are just one-line comments or somebody making a joke about the film or just watched in cinema with so-and-so. A lot of people are logging films and talking about them differently to, I guess, the way we were or what way I was when growing up. Like Adam, Facebook didn't exist until I was at university, and even then I managed to avoid being sucked into the social network.
I think there are still young people who do have a lot to say and would make good posts on traditional forums. I just don't know if there are enough forums around or if there's enough interest in general. I don't think we can say that all young people just want to do like hashtag posts and everything. There's always going to be people who have a lot to contribute. It just depends on if they can find the websites to do it or if they are interested in them nowadays.
Yeah, I think that, if you look at Letterboxd, that's essentially replaced IMDb in some ways. It's probably one of their main competitors. And obviously don't have a forum, but they do have the reviews. And you do see a lot of really good quality content there. But again, it's just also found that probably the biggest film review site has so many one-liners.
Yeah, and Yoka just made a comment that there's lots of old people who would just do hashtag posts as well. So I think it's not about age in terms of how much people can contribute. I just think that it's about platforms that are available or that are prominent with different age groups. Because I think there's probably lots of people who, even if traditional forums were the only option, there's probably lots of people who would only post like one sentence at a time or not give out big film reviews either. So I think it's less generational in terms of what they're able to contribute and more about the changing nature of the internet.
Or maybe it's not even changing. I think what you just described was the IMDb forums.
I think I agree with Adam that a lot of it's about the availability and that there aren't those message boards out there that people can find easily. Them and Lauren probably need to advertise ICM Forum a bit more. I don't know. But if it was maybe better known, maybe it would get more people coming along there. But I think there aren't really the well-known movie forums out there the way that they were when I was growing up. I mean, even when I went to university and I was doing film studies for a little bit, people knew about the IMDb message boards. I don't know if ICM Forum is quite as well known in that way, and we are probably the biggest forum out there at the moment.
Yeah, or at least the biggest forum for actual film discussion among film buffs and cinephiles, like people who actually watch a lot of films and want to discuss them in details. I don't think there's any forum bigger than us in that specific niche out there.
We are at least the biggest I Check Movies forum. That's one thing I will claim.
I think that's one thing why, well, I mean, we are quite big, but we're also quite small because we started off as like a fan forum for I Check Movies. So it brought in a very specific type of person rather than people who wanted to just talk about film. We're very kind of list obsessed and spreadsheet obsessed and very focused on I check movies rather than films, although we've kind of gone more broad now.
Yeah, that's a perfect point, Lauren, because when we first started, there was a really clear type of film buff we were attracting there. There's people who are really obsessed with lists and people who really wanted to do anything listable, anything about statistics. And that was really great. But at that point, you didn't really have the discussions. And I think it was when first the film general offshoots like FG2 and FG3 started dying off and those regulars started coming over. And then again, when IMDb actually killed off the forum and the hordes of IMDb posters joined, that we really started to change as a forum and got a lot more quality discussion.
Yeah, look, I wasn't around in the early days of ICM Forum, but I think it has evolved and become a more general forum. Now we've got a number of active users who use the forum but actually aren't registered at ICM. They just use it because they know that it's the best place to talk about movies or the best place to list 5,000 films in a poll. I'm going to mention who that is. There are some people out there without ICM accounts who just like using the forum to discuss movies. I think what ICM Forum has done since 2007 is they've actually filled that gap was taken away by IMDb, because over the time, it wasn't all instantly, but over the course of 2017 till the end of the year, I started noticing more and more names of people who are recognized from the IMDb message boards. And I think a lot of the cross-pollination with doubling the canon exercise being done on both forums sort of introduced people to ICM Forum. So they sort of knew about it and knew that it was one of the other options out there. And I think we have become a much more general forum. Of course, everybody just keep referencing I check movies, but I think we've really expanded beyond that.
I actually think one of the problems nowadays is because you're getting sites like IMDb closing down the official forum. I think one of the problems is trying to attract new users. I think that's a problem for every forum nowadays. Because they're no longer officially attached to massive websites, it's a real struggle to actually get anyone to sign up. And even like the IMDb clones, I'm sure they have thousands of users, but people have to actively search for them. So if you take away the element of forums being attached to a big film website, then you really are struggling to attract an audience. I think that's why nowadays it's even harder for forums to get new members. I mean, our forum, for example, when IMDb closed, maybe 20 or 30 people joined and became regulars. So we kind of relied on a big forum closing just to get more people. But without that, you're picking up a few users here and there, but not a lot of new active ones. And so just mentioned more than 30 IMDb users. I don't know the exact number, but the amount of IMDb users who've stuck around as regulars, I would say is probably maybe 20 or so who post a lot rather than people who just browse the forum and post very occasionally.
You're right with that, Adam. I would say 20 to 30 that became hardcore regulars, but I also think that almost half or even more of all of the film general regulars and classic film regulars at least signed up and are participating from time to time. So you get a lot of these people who use ICM Forum as their main forum, one of their main forums. But obviously you will always have a select group of absolute regulars who will post every single day. I think that you hit the nail very, very well there when I was talking about how when you don't have a massive website holding everything up, it's really hard to attract new visitors. And I hadn't even thought of this, but I think this is probably the main reason why forums died. Because if you look at the main forums people used to be on, so again, the IMDb forums, Mubi, RottenTomatoes, those were massive websites. And now that these places don't have forums anymore, at least I think RottenTomatoes don't have forums anymore. If they do, they're probably pretty dead. When all of these websites just lost their forums or got rid of their forums, there was just no new source of regulars. And this is also one of those things we talked a little bit about before, and it's probably one of the reasons why ICM Forum is so strong as it is, because on every other forum I've ever been on, there was this core group of 20-something people. And usually a lot of teenagers too. So you would get a lot of, say, 16 to 25-year-old posters. And these are the type of posters who will watch a lot of films during high school and college and in their early years working. But then they get married, they settle down, and they get less time to post. But for the ICM forum, I think the majority of posters are well over 30. And I think like every single person who's been on this podcast as well, except Clem, has been over 30. So I think we have a lot more stability. You have the people who actively want to participate even though they have settled down. Oh yeah, I see now Lauren saying that she's not 30 yet. So, okay, even our co-founder isn't quite 30, but everybody else essentially are. So that's definitely something that makes our forum a lot more different.
Something I might just mention, I'm actually watching more films now since I've joined icmmovies. Just with the icmmovies and the ICM forum and all the challenges there, I've actually got a reason to be watching a film. Before I joined ICM Forum, I'd spend sometimes up to 45 minutes or an hour looking through my DVDs going, oh, what do I feel like watching? As with all the challenges that we have going on the iCheckMovies forum, I've always got something lined up that I can settle down and view. So I'm watching at least 1.5 times as many films per year as I was doing, say, 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, yeah, I've definitely gone the completely other way, but that's more about just how much time I have in my personal life.
Yeah, the year before we started the forum, I watched about 300 films. And then the next 2 years, I watched 1,000 films each year. It's died down a lot now, but when we first started, I didn't stop watching films.
I think there was a month where Lauren watched about 2 million horror films as well. So that might be connected to forums and challenges.
It was 306.
Sorry, I was wrong.
I'm impressed you remember that number too, and that's probably one of the highest numbers of films anyone has ever seen, and it's so impressive.
I'm actually the third most watched on the DVD Talk forums for the horror challenge, so there's people who have beat me before, so it's not that impressive.
Were you not accused of being a cheater on that forum as well? Or am I remembering incorrectly?
Yeah, there were a few people who said that it was impossible, but I was like, I planned it all out in a spreadsheet, how many hours per day I was going to be watching them, and I'm not going to cheat anyway, so what am I going to get out of it? But they said that everyone who watches more than like 250 basically gets accused of being a cheater, but I go back every year, so I think they don't think that anymore.
Wait, you mean you have another forum, Lauren?
Only in October.
That's borderline acceptable, we'll forgive you.
Like, I remember Adam being mad that I would go to IMDb forums, I would go to like FG3 for a while too, so we have a lot of ICM forum patriotism, I guess.
Most of it is joking, okay?
I love that tone. Most of it is joking. I just want to add that, the dedication that Lauren showed there, planning everything out with spreadsheets, is just a perfect example of the type of user that we have on the ICM forum. There's a lot of people who are incredibly dedicated that way. And then, of course, we also have the hordes of people from IMDb that are quite different. So it's such a really great and fun mix. Anything you're looking for, you'll pretty much find. Like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, we'll be exploring a lot of trauma and a lot of sadness. But I don't really think we have been talking about a lot of trauma and a lot of sadness. And that's in large part because we have the ICM forum.
It was quite devastating in a way when the IMDb message board shut down. As I mentioned earlier on, I grew up on it. It was something that I'd do after school or at school during a free study period. And when it shut down, I didn't know exactly what to think because I'd been a member of it for literally half my life. And it really was a big life change. With a lot of changes, they are for the better. And there might have been a bit of trauma to begin off with. I managed to settle down quite easily with the ICM forum. So I'm not feeling quite as traumatized now. I know some of my friends didn't handle it that well. I had one friend in particular who kept messaging me, who was there at the final part where they're pulling everything around and parts of it were disappearing. And I was just like, I don't really have time for that in my life. But it was quite a bit of a life changer.
I think the weird thing for me was that I was gone from the IMDb forum for such a long time. I was really active there from like 2006, 2007 up to maybe 2008-9. And then I became less and less of a regular because the trolls were taking over. The conversations weren't that interesting. And I had been joining other forums, including the Film General offshoots, which were absolutely fantastic. I think I was far more sad when, say, FG3, which was the final Film General offshoot, slowly started declining and there were less and less posts. I think I was far more sad by that, even though it was a longer burn than the IMDb board. Though, ironically, I had just started posting again on the IMDb board a few months before that notice came, just wanting some of that activity back. So that was very odd timing.
Actually, a very interesting point, Chris, because my activity on IMDb did also drop down towards the end. I was pretty much literally only posting once a week with my weekly viewings on the weekly thread there. If anybody responded to, I would reply. I wouldn't really respond to any other threads because they would all get hit up by trolls, or the people who are on the classic film board were the ones who really wanted to be discussing with, because they'd get all defensive and everything if you started knocking one of their favorites. So yeah, towards the end, my activity was very low. I was at maybe 3 posts at most per week. Whereas when I first started off when I was 14 or 15, I would be doing, 20 or 30 posts a day. And then when you come to ICM Forum, I'm at over 8,000 posts over 3.5 years. Obviously, there's much more to discuss now than I felt there was, or I felt that I was comfortable doing towards the end of IMDb's days.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Saul. It's so much easier to share your opinion on the new forum, and it's so much easier. I shouldn't even say new, it's been around for almost a decade, but it's so much easier to talk to people there. You don't have that extreme aggressiveness. So that's definitely one of the things that makes ICM Forum so special. I think we pretty much covered almost everything we want to do. There isn't really any sadness, and things seem to be pretty good. And the ICM Forum is honestly, it's stronger than ever, I'd say. We have such a great core user base now that there's nothing I really miss.
Probably the only part of ICM Forum which I find a little bit stressful, but I'm going to try and rework it this year, is setting up the challenge schedule, which I've been doing for the last few years. And you just get some really interesting and very passionate comments in there. And then people start commenting on the results of the poll before the poll is finished. And there's still 3 weeks left to go, and they're like, oh, I can't believe this topic is winning or whatever. So I'm thinking about redoing it for this year to make it slightly less stressful, but I know there's a lot of really passionate people about certain things that they'd like to have challenges on.
I think we also covered the vicious cycle that ended the majority of forums. So we have the major websites shutting them down, and we have the forum users simply disappearing because they didn't have as much time to post them with less activity. There's less posts, with less new members coming in, seeing the posts. There's less people wanting to stay. I think I'm just so happy that ICM Forum has managed to last for almost a decade. We'll have a 10-year celebration coming soon. It's fantastic that we never really got that dip. I think some people started to be a little bit worried before the IMDb forums closed down that we were just reasonably active at that point, but we got so many fantastic regulars, and now we're just extremely active at all times.
I think there's another problem as well where there's quite a few small forums, I think, that are left that cover the same kind of topic as ICM Forum. And people like to stick to their own community. So there's probably still a few that we don't know about. There's probably still quite a few small forums. But the idea of kind of merging them all together sounds great. But I think people like to retain their own forum name. If a bigger forum came along and tried to merge with us, I'm sure that we would be against it.
That's so true as well. There's probably such a large amount of small forums with just very, very little activity with people still clinging on. Like I know that, like I kept posting on, for instance, FG3 for a long time after it's almost no activity. So that's definitely still going on. And I know some posters there who never really went anywhere else. And that's also sad. So I really do hope that if anyone who's on an active forum listens to this, that you would join, the ICM forum, because it will do you good, to be on an active forum again. It's sad to see forums die, and it's sad to let go, but that's what happens. So yeah, I guess all we can say is thank you, Adam and Lauren, for setting up the forum, and thank you for all of your work over the last few years.
You're welcome, Chris, and thank you for being there from the start and being a moderator.
And thank all of our wonderful users for keeping it alive and as wonderful as it is.
And people, if you actually want to know the full background story to how the ICM forum was started, and there's some pretty juicy and almost extreme and unbelievable things in there, do join us again next week when Saul and I will interview Adam and Lauren, and they will take us on one hell of a ride. We will discuss how they set up the forum, the obstacles and wars in their way, and how we got the forum we have today. So thank you for listening, guys, and join us again soon. You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.